What's going on, Babylonians? It's me, Songs of Rays, and today we're going to be doing a follow-up to the Ice-sassin build from last week, as it's now improved massively in DPS and clear speeds, allowing you to be able to mop up dungeons in minutes and dismantle elites in seconds. If you love the first Ice-sassin, you're going to love this one. We're going to discuss all you need to know to be able to gear the class up, what to look out for enchantment-wise, and all the combos to be able to maximize the damage potential for you. So what are we waiting for? Let's get right into it. Now, there have been a few changes from when we were able to do the first Ice-sassin build, and most notably is going to be the basic skill, because while we did go for Invigorating Strike initially, just because we were trying to get our energy regen up massively, the best way to actually do it now is going to be using the skill Puncture, where you throw blades a short distance, dealing a small amount of damage, and every third cast slows the enemies by 20% for 2.08 seconds. Critical strikes on these will always slow the enemy. On top of that, we have picked up two very useful modifiers, where 2 gain 2 energy when puncture damages a crowd control enemy, which we will pretty much be doing just from casting this skill, but we do have a couple of other methods to be able to do that. And now puncture also throws 3 blades in the spread, each dealing 35% of its base damage. Hitting an enemy with at least 2 blades at once will then make them vulnerable for 2 seconds, increasing our DPS output, especially if in close quarters, and being able to land our twisted blades. But I'm getting ahead of myself, we'll cover that skill very shortly. So that pretty much wraps up our basic skills, so now we're going to go to our core skills to be able to look at what resource spending skills we're going to use to be able to increase our DPS output. Now, first and foremost, and this is also going to be a change, this is a brand new skill for the build, this is going to be Flurry, where you unleash a flurry of stabs and slashes, striking enemies in front of you 4 times and dealing a total of 259 to 317 damage each. This also gets affected by combo points, which we will be talking about a little bit later in the video, but most of the time you won't really be trying to use your combo points on this ability. This one's just pretty much there to be able to apply some freeze. It's going to apply as a status, and looking at the modifiers as well, each time Flurry damages a crowd controlled or vulnerable enemy, you are healed for 1% of your maximum life, up to 12% maximum every single cast, and if Flurry hits any vulnerable enemy, it will make all enemies hit by that cast vulnerable for 3 seconds. So this ties in perfectly with our puncture ability, because we will be able to do things like vulnerable to be able to get our massive damage increase, and then we are able to spread it around by using Flurry to be able to initiate that combat. But our main damage dealer is going to be, of course, Twisting Blades, where you impale an enemy with your blades, dealing a certain amount of damage, making them take 8% increased damage for them while they are impaled, and after 1.5 seconds the blades return to us, dealing piercing damage through all the enemies on the way back for even more damage on top of that. This is going to be the main skill that we're going to be using our combo points for, and this is what is going to be racking up our damage to just pure high heavens, really. On top of that, we have picked up a couple of modifiers. When using your Twisting Blades return, your active cooldowns are reduced by 1 second for every single enemy that they pass through, up to a total of 3 seconds, so this allows us to be able to get all our skills back off cooldown faster. And Twisting Blades also deals 30% increased damage when they are on their return journey. So once again, as we did with the Ice-sassin, we're pretty much going to be using this as our main DPS damage dealer. So we are going to be relying on those blades returning back through a horde of enemies to be able to clear up kind of mob trash enemies. And then we're also going to use it to be able to do insane amounts of damage when it comes to elites, pretty much wiping them in literally as little as 2 casts. Now, moving down to the agility tree, we don't really use too much here. Now, I do have 1 point, and I do use a skill from here just purely because of my gear, and that's going to be Shadow Step, where you become unstoppable and quickly move through the shadows to stab your victim from behind, dealing a decent amount of damage, but you gain 50% increased movement speed for 2 seconds afterwards. Now, primarily, I don't really want to be able to use a point in this. I don't really consider this like a decent damage dealing skill or anything like that, but it is a great way to be able to increase your movement speed, and it's a great way to be able to move around the environment. Now, you can't use this without actually targeting an enemy, so just keep that in mind. So it's not like something like Caltrops or like your smoke grenade or anything like that, where you can just cast it anywhere and it would basically just teleport you there. You do need to be able to target an enemy, and it is also imbuable, which means that when we use our cold imbue in a little bit of a second, so therefore this will also be applied by that as well, which can take away one of your charges, so that's definitely something to be mindful of. But I digress, it is definitely worth being able to get that 50% increased movement speed for 2 seconds afterwards being able to use this skill, and it's also a great way to be able to chain going from one mob enemy to another mob enemy, basically increasing your clear speeds when it comes to those dungeons. But the main thing that we're going to put 3 points into is going to be Weapon Mastery, where we gain a bonus when attacking based on whichever weapon types we have equipped. So in this case we have daggers and we do have swords equipped as it currently stands. I would primarily like to be able to go for 2 daggers mainly because that would give us a 30% increased damage to healthy enemies, and that would make it so much easier to be able to wipe enemies out in certain casts. But swords are also great ways to be able to do this, and also you get a 9% increased damage for each sword that you do have equipped, and because the rogue can equip one in each hand, you do get that up to a 18% increased damage. Moving on, we have the subterfuge skills, and once again we don't really use too much here. What we do though is we do go straight down to be able to grab exploit, to be able to put 3 points in there where we deal 18% increased damage to healthy and injured enemies, which is a great way to start a fight and also get it all finished off. And then we also put 1 point into malice to be able to deal 3% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. If I had a couple more spare points I would 100% fill this up, and so we have 9% increase, but unfortunately we don't have enough to be able to grab everything that we would like in this build. Our penultimate one is obviously going to be the imbuement skills, and once again we are picking up that cold imbuement where we imbue our weapons with frigid energies, and the next 2 imbuable skills deal cold damage and chill enemies for 25% per hit. We do also pick up a couple of modifiers here where on a lucky hit our cold imbued skills have up to a 30% chance to be able to make enemies vulnerable for 3 seconds, and cold imbued skills deal 20% more damage to crowd controlled enemies, and this gets doubled when this bonus against frozen enemies. Now this chill and this frozen ability is going to be great for the next few points that we're going to be using, but it also is a great way to be able to slow enemies down, allowing you to be able to chain this through several different enemies and be able to train them all up into a certain area, ready for those returning blades to be able to come back through and be able to deal that massive amount of damage. Of course, we are once again picking up Frigid Finesse, where you deal 15% increased damage to chilled enemies, and this bonus increases to 30% against frozen enemies. There is a reliable way to be able to freeze enemies in this case, because we are using Flurry, and one of these certain aspects that we will be picking up, which you can get from one of the dungeons inside the beta, is a great way to be able to apply this even to certain elites. The only ones that it won't work against are bosses, but everything else will get instantly frozen, meaning that you're going to be doing some insane damage potential when it comes to being able to take down some of those bigger targets. And then of course our last point is going to be going to our ultimate of Shadow Clone, where our shadow mimics our actions for 15 seconds and this deals 60% of your damage. Pretty much going to be, once you cast this, an extra 60% of your DPS, just purely from being able to actually use this skill. So everything else that you're currently going to be doing, whether that be a cold flurry, whether that be a cold twisted blade, is going to be copied by the Shadow Clone, and that just boosts up our DPS to be able to take down the bosses and be able to melt them down, just pretty much as simple as that. Now of course we do need to touch on specializations, and once again we are going for that combo point, being able to get our basic skills now generating combo points, and our core skills will consume those for additional effects. In the case of our flurry, we will be getting a 15% damage increase for every single combo point that we do get, obviously increasing that up to a 45% at maximum. But the real winner, and the only other one that's really going to benefit from this, is going to be our Twisting Blades, because at 3 points we will get a 60% damage bonus, and this will apply to the initial hit and pretty much also on that return journey as well. With all the extra damage that pretty much comes from Twisting Blades, being able to hit the enemy to be able to deal that extra damage, or having that damage vulnerability for that 8% when we actually leave the daggers left inside, and then all the extra damage multipliers on the return journey, it's no-brainer as to why Twisting Blades is so strong in this current build. But the name of the game with this build is being able to hit hard and be able to hit fast and get in and out and pretty much all like that. You will literally just be marching your way through mobs and letting your Twisting Blades do all the work for you. With that being said, we do need to have a look at certain aspects, and the main one that's going to be the real damage dealer here, especially when it comes to Twisting Blades, is going to be the one where they orbit a short time after they return to you, dealing a certain amount of percentage of Twisting Blades return damage per hit. Based on the distance that the blades returned, the orbit damage increases all the way up to double what they would have done with the initial start of that return damage. Now if you were going to put this on something, I would recommend putting it on a two-handed weapon or on an amulet to be able to take advantage of that 2x bonus, and the reason why is because this is your main damage dealer. This is going to be your main way to be able to melt through elites and bosses, so I highly recommend that you try and maximize this damage boost as much as you can. The other one that I've really been messing about with is going to be this one, where skills deal up to a certain amount of percentage, so in this case 45%, and it's increased damage based on your available primary resource when cast, receiving the maximum benefit when you have full primary resource. This is a flat damage bonus regardless of how much resource you have, and obviously the more that you do have, the better it's going to be for you. Now it's really easy to be able to keep this damage bonus as high as possible because we are able to use puncture to be able to get those modifiers with gaining extra energy when we hit a crowd control enemy, which we will be doing, especially if we are using our twisted blades. But on top of that, it also stacks us up with some energy as well, and then we do also have something else in terms of an aspect in terms of the build to be able to start helping us regen as much as possible, so that we are pretty much always topped up when it comes to having that extra damage bonus. Speaking of which, that's where we're going to have the restore one, or anywhere between 1 to 4 of your primary resource when you can crowd control an enemy, and because we will pretty much be doing like chills here, there and everywhere, we're going to be always applying that. It's even better when we use a cold imbued flurry, because that means we're going to be doing damage all around us, and that everyone's going to start getting chilled or frozen, meaning that we get all of that primary resource back, ready for our twisting blades to be able to apply the final hit. Speaking of which, that's where we have this one, which is the flurry damages enemies in a circle around you, and deals a little bit of extra increased damage. Now you can get this from one of the dungeons that's available inside the beta, and I highly recommend that if you are going for this build, that you definitely grab that as well and put it somewhere in your build. In terms of the increased damage, it's not going to be the main damage dealer, so you can just put this anywhere that you can. You do not need to worry about the 2x modifiers or anything like that. It's just pretty much there to be able to have the being able to deal damage in a circle around you rather than the increased damage. Everything else is pretty much the same, but notable inclusions that we do have are going to be chilled enemies hit by a grenade skill, have a chance equal to double your critical strike chance to be instantly frozen for 2 seconds, and you deal 18% increased critical strike damage against frozen enemies. This ties in really nicely when we have the gloves. When you evade or shadow step, you leave behind a exploding cluster of stun grenades that deal a decent amount of damage and then stun enemies for 0.5 seconds. 1, this works for crowd control, and 2, because they are grenades, they will have a chance to be able to freeze enemies as soon as you pass through them, so it's definitely worthwhile being able to do that. And then because they're frozen, they get increased amounts of damage hit by them when it comes to twisting blades or when you've got your cold imbuement, so you can definitely take advantage of that increased DPS. Lastly, we do also have the 20% increased crowd control duration and deal 50% increased damage to unstoppable enemies. This is really nice to be able to take down some of those bigger enemies, some of the elites, the bosses that do have that icon that is above them. You can definitely take advantage of this to be able to melt them down even faster. But of course, where else would we be if we didn't have combo points combined with attacking enemies with a basic skill? Increases the damage of your next core skill cast by a certain amount of percent. In this case, I've got a god roll one of 10%, and that is up to 50%, which means that every 5 throws of puncture, which is relatively fast to be able to cast, I can then deal 50% increased damage when it comes to my twisting blades. Now, unfortunately, when it comes to attributes, this build is not catered for it just yet. I am currently still trying to farm for some of the pieces to be able to start sorting that out, but you definitely want to grab things like increased critical strike chance, life on kill, increased bonus damage, and also cold damage if you can get it, and also damage to close enemies as well as crowd controlled enemies. While it doesn't have to be purely all of those, as long as you've got a couple of those mixed into this build, the rest of the build will actually carry you through all of the dungeons and any of the content that Diablo 4 can currently throw at you. So there we go, that is everything on the Ice-sassin 2.0 build, probably the best when it comes to close range DPS, and it's just insane as the amount of damage numbers that it can pop out, especially the amount of crowd control and when it comes to chill and frozen. I honestly think this is my favourite when it comes to the whole of Diablo 4's beta so far in terms of all the classes that I've played, and I genuinely had so much fun putting this all together, and it's definitely something I'm looking forward to be able to put together when the full game does release. But let me know in the comment section down below, how have you been finding the rogue builds? Have you got anything similar to this? And would you be tempted to move away from something like Shadow or Poison Imbuement to be able to try out Cold, to be able to increase your maximum DPS across the whole board against all enemies, rather than just having Shadow deal with some trash mobs? Massive thank you for making your way to the end of the video. Massive thank you to the Babylonian family as always for their continued support. Their names appear at the end of every single one of our videos to be able to show thank you for their support over the years. Of course, if you enjoyed, make sure to drop a like and a subscribe. It really does help the channel out, but it also lets you know when more Diablo 4 content from ourselves will be coming your way, whether that's guides or whether that's going to be other helpful tips. But with all that said and done, make sure, keep yourself safe, keep yourselves well, and I'll see you all on our next video.